The beautifully brutal life of Michelangelo. Welcome back to Armchair Italy, the podcast where we pull back the velvet ropes of history to see what the Renaissance really smelled like. I'm your host, and today we're talking about a man who was quite literally touched by God. A man who created what is arguably the single greatest fresco on earth. But before he was a legend, he was a roommate's nightmare. Let's just put it out there, Michelangelo had absolutely terrible hygiene. In fact, Michelangelo had smelly feet. The great master was a workaholic, even by modern standards. He was in the zone. He saw food as a rude interruption, if he ate at all. It was just bread and wine clutched in a paint-stained hand while he kept working. And if food was an afterthought, you can imagine how he treated bathing. Michelangelo would wear the exact same clothes for weeks on end, working in them, sleeping in them, completely consumed by his art. There's a famous account that when he finally pulled off his leather boots, his skin had fused to the leather and peeled right off with them. So how does a guy that stubborn and rough around the edges become the darling of the Renaissance? It all started with a literal beating. The dust in the milk. Michelangelo pursued his passion from a very young age, but his father and uncle actually beat him to try to deter him. They thought being an artist, or working with your hands, was beneath the family name, but Michelangelo's obsession was already in his DNA. He always signed his letters as Michelangelo the Sculptor. He didn't consider himself a painter. He believed his love for stone came from his wet nurse, who was the daughter and wife of a stonemason. He used to joke that the marble dust mixed with his childhood milk, giving him a hunger for sculpture that consumed him the rest of his days. Eventually, his family had a massive change of heart when Lorenzo the Magnificent, the head of the ultra-powerful Medici family, spotted his talent, and young Michelangelo moved directly into the Medici household to refine his skills. But courtly life, it did not agree with him. Michelangelo hated fine clothes, and he didn't care about anyone's feelings. He was grumpy, arrogant, and spoke his mind with zero regard for the consequences. In fact, his mouth got him into trouble early on. While studying at the Brancacci Chapel, side note, learn more about the Brancacci Chapel in the episode titled The Sistine Chapel of the Early Renaissance, right here on the Armchair Italy podcast. He insulted the work of a fellow student named Pietro Torrigiano. Pietro didn't take it well. He punched Michelangelo square in the face. The blow shattered Michelangelo's nose, scarring him for life. If you look at portraits of him today, you can see his nose is permanently askew. The ultimate Renaissance setup. Now, Renaissance Italy was a cutthroat corporate ladder. Artists had to fight tooth and nail for papal commissions. But Michelangelo's biggest enemy wasn't the competition, it was himself. He trusted absolutely no one. So, when Pope Julius II offered him the job to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo did the unthinkable. He refused 3 times. To turn down the Pope in Renaissance Italy was social and spiritual suicide. But Michelangelo insisted, "I am a sculptor, not a painter." He even recommended his young rival Raphael for the job. But here's the twist. Michelangelo didn't realize he was being set up. The papal architect Bramante was the one who suggested Michelangelo to the Pope. Bramante hated Michelangelo and wanted to clear the field for his close friend Raphael. Bramante's plan was brilliant in its malice. Either Michelangelo would refuse and infuriate the Pope, or he'd take the job, fail miserably, and ruin his reputation forever. History, of course, has a great sense of humor. Michelangelo was forced to accept the commission, but he didn't just paint a ceiling. He completely threw out the original plans and redesigned everything. He had to teach himself how to do fresco on the fly. He had to learn how to prepare the plaster, mix the paints, and draw massive cartoons, the stencils, while mathematically adjusting for the perspective of the viewer standing far below on the chapel floor. It took him 4 agonizing years, and he hated every single day of it. He didn't paint on his back, by the way. He stood on a massive scaffold he designed himself. To give you an idea of the physical torture he endured, he wrote a poem to his friend Giovanni da Pistoia, and even doodled a little caricature of himself on the side of the page. Listen to how miserable he was. I've got myself a goiter from this strain. My belly's pushed by force beneath my chin, my beard toward heaven. I feel the back of my brain upon my neck. My brush above my face continually makes it a splendid floor by dripping down. My loins have pushed to my paunch. My rump is a counterweight. I am bending like a Syrian bow. John, come to the rescue of my dead painting now, and of my honor. I am not in a good place, and I am no painter. Imagine writing that while creating the ultimate masterpiece of Western civilization. The ultimate flex. Michelangelo kept the chapel locked down. No one was allowed in, but the Pope insisted on a partial unveiling during a religious holiday. All the great artists and powers that be of Italy crowded into the Sistine Chapel, including Raphael, who was literally next door painting the papal apartments. When Raphael saw what Michelangelo had achieved, he was so awestruck that he went back to his own masterpiece, the School of Athens, the very next day. He actually chiseled out a giornata, which is a single day's worth of wet plaster work, just so he could add Michelangelo into his painting. If you look at the School of Athens today, you can see the seams in the plaster where Raphael added him as the brooding philosopher Heraclitus, sitting on the steps, leaning on a block of marble. And here's the best part. Michelangelo is the only person in the entire Greek painting wearing gritty 16th century Renaissance work clothes. Raphael painted him exactly as he saw him on that scaffolding, dirty, grumpy, and wearing those legendary unwashed clothes and boots. 29 years later, Michelangelo would return to the chapel to paint the Last Judgment, and as a final nod to his own suffering, he painted a self-portrait, not as a saint, but as the hollow, flayed skin being held up by St. Bartholomew. He gave his mind, his body, and yes, the skin off of his feet to his art. Thanks for sitting with us in the armchair today. If you enjoyed this dive into the gritty side of Italy's masters, make sure to hit follow, leave us a review, and we will see you next week on Armchair Italy. If you're planning to visit Italy and the Sistine Chapel is on your itinerary, be sure to check out armchairitaly.com to find amazing tour providers of the Sistine Chapel. Ciao!